Senator Paterson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President, and I am very pleased to rise to speak on this issue because I am from the generation that struggles with this issue. A phrase was used before, Generation Rent. I am Generation Rent. My wife and I are currently saving up to buy our first home, saving our deposit. We know how hard it is. We know the challenges that young people in Australia are facing in the housing market. But the reality is that those opposite have absolutely no answers and no understanding of the real causes of housing unaffordability. All of the international evidence shows that the most powerful thing that you can do to improve housing affordability is to increase the supply of land. This is not an issue which is a recent issue. This is not an issue which only Australia faces. This is a widely studied issue. And there are reports put out each year that look at all the different factors that affect housing affordability. And every time they conclude that jurisdictions which have an easy supply of land, an open supply of land, and less restrictive planning restrictions on what you can do on that land are also the jurisdictions that have the most affordable housing. It's not a coincidence that Australia, with some of the worst land release policies in the world and the most restrictive planning regulations on what you can do on that land, has some of the least affordable housing in the world. But of course, that is not something which is in the control of the federal government. Whether senators opposite like it or not, we live in a federal system. And unless you're proposing a referendum to change the constitution to give the federal government control over the supply of land and abolish state governments, then there is a limited amount that the federal government can do to improve that. It does rest on state governments to release more land, to reduce the regulation on planning, to allow people to do more on that land if you actually want to improve housing affordability. I find it particularly ironic that this issue was raised today by the former Chief Minister of the ACT. The ACT is not exactly renowned for record housing affordability, not exactly renowned for good land release policies or light regulation on planning. In fact, it's the opposite. Despite being one of the wealthiest jurisdictions in Australia, the highest income jurisdictions in Australia, it faces some of the most severe housing affordability stresses in the nation. So those opposite would do well to look in their own backyard and what they have contributed to this issue. Those opposite do suggest, though, that we should look at negative gearing as a possible solution to this. This is just an absolute fallacy of economics. In which other market would we try and control the demand to improve the price? If we had an issue of the affordability of bread, would we put a tax on bread to make it more affordable, or would we look at measures to increase the supply of bread to make it more affordable? It is absolute economic lunacy to put a tax on something in an effort to make it more affordable. Of course, the negative gearing policy doesn't only apply to housing, it also applies to shares. This is part of their grand plan to improve housing affordability, remove the tax deductibility for shares that are making a loss. This is the kind of harebrained economic thinking that is going on in the Labor Party at the moment. Of course, capital gains tax is widely renowned around the world as one of the least efficient forms of raising revenue. Around the world, countries are looking at abolishing capital gains tax, cutting capital gains tax, and yet we have the Labor Party in Australia recommending that we increase capital gains tax. Again, sheer economic lunacy. Of course, one of the suggestions of those opposite is that maybe this would be improved if we had a housing minister. Well, the previous federal Labor government did have a housing minister, and how did that work out? How did that improve anything for my generation? How did that make housing more affordable? This is typical of the attitude of those who think that the federal government and governments generally can fix all the problems that we face, and that if we only appointed a minister for it, then it would improve. The housing minister in the previous government didn't do such a bang-up job in fixing this problem, so I have no confidence that a new housing minister would fix it either. As I said, this is a serious issue, and it is one that particularly affects my generation. But this is an issue that will be solved at the state level by state governments releasing more land and reducing the regulations on planning so that people can do more on their land. The best way to solve any affordability problem is to increase supply. And in a federal system of government, that's the responsibility of our states and our local councils. The solution to this issue is not higher and increased taxes. It is not fiddling with negative gearing, which the Prime Minister has very eloquently described as the greatest assault on economic freedom in his lifetime. It's certainly the greatest assault on economic freedom in my lifetime. This is a measure which is used by largely middle and low-income people to improve their lives, to invest, to pass on wealth to their children, and I don't think that is something that should be closed off to them. And I'm very proud to be part of a government that is defending those who want to invest in housing and improve the wealth of their families. Thank you very much.